My name's Dave Ford, and this is my dog Logan. Well, we're out on another walk in the New Forest. Today we're at a place called Ashley Walk, which is in the northwest corner of the New Forest, not too far from Fordingbridge. Now, our walk today, on the face of it, if you look at the map, doesn't look all that interesting. A lot of heathland and woodland, but in fact there's a lot of history around this place, and we're going to do a bit of exploring, so do join us. Now, starting the walk, I've parked the car. I'll turn around to show you. Right at the top there's the Ashley Walk car park, Forestry Commission car park, and that's where we've parked the car. And we've come down that little track there called Snake Road, lovely little bridge over something called Ditch End Brook, and we're now going to carry on up another ridge behind us for our first port of call, and I'll tell you a bit more about that when we get there. Well, we're making our way up the ridge. A little bit of housekeeping as we go along. I'm filming today, the last couple of days in October. Clocks went back yesterday. It's a bright and sunny day, but bitterly cold, about 1 or 2 degrees, and there's quite a wind. So if you see me filming from behind gorse bushes to keep out the wind, keep the noise level down on the camera, you'll know why. Now, I mentioned there's a bit of history attached to this area. Back in 1939, the area around here was requisitioned by the Army or Ministry of Defence, and it was used as a bombing range for 6 years. Something like 5,000 acres were set aside. It was all fenced in, and 9 miles of fencing, 6 foot high. It took about 2 months for them to clear the whole area of livestock. After the war, the whole area was allowed to go back to how nature had it before. But there's quite a lot of evidence still floating around, and that's what we're going to be having a look at today. This is our first little bit of evidence. It's behind me here. I turn the camera around. As you can see, it looks like, well, this is a slab of concrete, but in fact this is the base of a target that was known as the ship's target. And attached to this base would have been a piece of sheet metal about 40 foot long, 20 foot high, and ½ an inch thick. And indeed you can still make out little bits of bolt that the metal sheet was attached to. And I say that it was supposed to represent a ship's hull. And so what would happen is that mosquito aeroplanes would come in from that direction, and they'd be testing out 20mm, 40mm cannon fire against this target here. But after the war, the metal was taken away and the base is still here, but as you can see, gradually becoming overgrown with vegetation. Another little bit of evidence, a pile of chalk. Now you might be thinking, why am I showing you a pile of chalk? And you might not take a second look at this, but chalk is an alien substance to the forest, and this has been here for 70 or 80 years, because during the war, while they were using it as a bombing range, one of the problems the pilots had around here was that there were no obvious landmarks such as buildings or church steeples to get their bearings. So they used the chalk to mark out various directional arrows and directional signs, and if you look at a Google map image of the area, you can still make out where those target signs or directional arrows are, because over time the chalk, although it's sort of washed away, the vegetation has never grown back, so you can still make out those outlines. They also use the chalk to mark out dummy railway lines, basically two lines parallel to each other. Again, they use that as target practice. So that's why there's a pile of chalk here. We're now at the top of a ridge, and just behind me here is the site of what was something known as the #1 wall target. I'll just turn round. Now here there was basically a wall 40 foot long, 40 foot high and 18 foot thick, and this target was used to test the effectiveness of bouncing bombs. So they weren't explosive bombs as such, but they were just testing the accuracy of inert bombs. And if you look on YouTube, you might come across some old footage of seeing some mosquitoes delivering them. And there were 3 of these wall targets along this ridge. And again, if you look on Google Map, you can see the outline of 5 concentric circles. They're still here, and those were man-made. Again, that was to help the pilots with their accuracy of delivering the bombs. The walls themselves were taken down straight after the war, and in 1991 the concrete bases were taken away, but you can still make out where they were, because as I say, the vegetation just refuses to grow back where the base of the wall was. Had a lot of fun up on the ridge exploring a number of craters, of which there are many up there. This time of year had a lot of rain, so quite a few of them are flooded out. I say craters, obviously they're bomb craters. We've now come down off the ridge into some forest, which is good news because we've got some temporary respite from that wind, so it's warming up. It's quite idyllic in here. I'll turn around. As you can see, plenty of squirrels, which Logan's loving. He's a good boy. He tends to leave, well, he ignores ponies and cattle and deer, but he will try and chase a squirrel. He's never got one, which is just as well, because they can be aggressive little critters if you get too close to them. But this is a lovely, very old wood. We're into a place called Pitt's Wood now. We're now heading quite deep into the Pitt's Wood enclosure, a very ancient wooded area. Some of the oldest oak trees in the whole of the New Forest are in here. If I pan round, In fact, you can see we're just coming out of the old part of the enclosure, and there we can see ahead with a squirrel darting across some of the newer pine trees. But the Pittswood enclosure here was originally set up in the late 1700s. I ought to explain what an enclosure is rather than an enclosure. An enclosure is basically a bit of cleared area or land where the commoner's rights are temporarily suspended to allow trees to be grown, basically, in a nutshell. But it's a lovely peaceful walk through here, and I love it the way the sun sort of peers through the canopy above. A lot of the bracken now beginning to die back, and a lot of the holly bushes starting to show signs of berries coming through. We've just come out of the Pittswood enclosure. I just want to show you this that's just stuck by the side that Logan's in front of. It looks like a gravestone, doesn't it? But in fact it's made of iron, and as you can see it's got written on it Pittswood Enclosed 1775, hinting that that's enclosed with an E, not an I. I don't know. It goes on to say that it was a chap called the Honourable Gerald Lascelles, who was a deputy surveyor of the forest at the time. There are about 6 of these, I think, all over the forest, and it was his thing, as it were, to put these up whenever an enclosure happened, but slightly different. We're now up on to the top of Hampton Ridge, and just behind me, of my left shoulder, there's what looks like a mound. You might think it's a burial mound or something like that, but in fact, believe it or not, underneath there is a fairly substantial concrete building, 80 foot long, 70 foot wide and 12 foot high. It was a target used in the war. For many years people thought it was a submarine target because it looked like a U-boat station, but a few years ago a chap went up to the Ministry of Defence in London, did some research, and in fact discovered it was a building designed to test the effectiveness of air raid shelters. Anyway, whatever it was so indestructible that when the war finished it was easier just to bury it, and so that's exactly what they did, and it's remained there ever since. Okay, let's see if we can get on top of the actual mound itself, see what we can find. And gosh, yes, there's the evidence of the roof beginning to poke through after all these years of weathering away. Amazing. I say this is quite close to a major walking route across the forest. I wonder how many people walk by this mound every day and don't actually realise what's underneath it. And you get some beautiful views up here as well. That's looking north. So just coming down off the Ministry of Defence target, looking south, you can see a pond there just in front of where the ponies are grazing. That's actually a crater, believe it or not, that was created by a bomb called a Tall Boy, 12,000 pound bomb dropped. 6 of those were dropped here on the range. In fact, I think it was a Tall Boy that was used to sink the German battle cruiser the Tirpitz. And then if I just pan over to the right, just in front of those trees, there's not a lot to see, but that's the location of a crater that was created by something called the Grand Slam bomb, or the earthquake bomb. It was massive, something like 22,000 pounds. It was dropped here in March 1945, and it's the biggest bomb ever to have been dropped in mainland UK. The crater itself was 130 foot wide and 70 foot deep. I say it was so big that they did fill that crater in after the war. But the very next day after they tested it, they used it live in action, and I believe it obliterated a viaduct in northern Germany. But all now peaceful, everything reverted back to nature now. Well folks, we've come to the end of our walk. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for another walk sometime in the future. Logan and I are off back to the car park and then back to the Fighting Cock's pub for a nice bowl of piping hot soup. In the meantime, thanks for watching and cheerio.